It is Friday, March 9th, 2018, and this is Seahawks Chats with Kenneth Arthur, where myself, Kenneth Arthur, brings in someone and we talk about the Seahawks. What else would we do? Well, sometimes I talk about, the other things, the draft, but this is Seahawks Chats, and so we're going to talk about the Seattle Seahawks, and they've given us something to talk about for the first time since, I guess, well, they did fire some coaches, and as far as transactions and stuff goes with the roster and the players, we didn't know what their plans were going to be and what the new coaches would want to see. And it seems that with the new coaches, there could be big changes coming. Already one significant change being Michael Bennett traded to the Philadelphia Eagles on Wednesday, with the Seattle Seahawks receiving in return Marcus Johnson, a wide receiver, special teamer, and moving up from the 7th to the 5th round. So Michael Bennett, after 5 years, does leave the Seahawks, a guy that helped them win the Super Bowl, the guy that helped him get to another Super Bowl, but is now 32, has moved on to another team. Richard Sherman reportedly will be released this week, and this week is almost over. So I'm saying it could happen while we're recording this show. There's trade rumors and release rumors, and who are they going to keep and who are they going to let go? And there's plenty now to be able to discuss with the roster, and still in addition to that, all that time that they didn't do anything to the roster and the coaching changes as well. So with me this week to help talk about it is John Fraley from Field Goals, from the site that you're on right here, right now, as well as his own podcast about the Seahawks, Beast Pod. And we can talk about that as well. I'll let John do that. John, thanks for coming on to the show. I like to start off, especially if the person is, a Field Goals writer, maybe showing up for or coming onto the podcast for the first time. What's your relationship with the Seattle Seahawks? How did it get started? And how long has that been going on?
Of course. I'm so glad to be on here. Thanks for inviting me. But we're going to talk Seahawks. I had all this stuff. I have reams of pages about the Rams. I was just going to talk Los Angeles Rams for half an hour. Man, Seahawks are really throwing me for a loop here. No, so I've been writing.
The Rams got stuff,
The Rams have done stuff, actually. That's a joke.
Rams have done stuff,
They have been kind of active, apparently. Apparently, they like cornerbacks.
Rams are bringing in Seahawks. Oh, actually, I guess the Rams are also sending stuff out. But the Rams are bringing in Seahawks, not so much.
No, not yet. Although Richard Sherman, future Ram Richard Sherman could be kind of a big deal staying in the NFC West. That's not really happening, is it? He's not going to sign with the Rams if they release him, right? That's not happening.
I think they were trying to get, all of the cornerbacks that they could in any of the divisions on any team.
All your cornerbacks. All right, I won't say or belong to us because that would be way too 2000s of me. Sure, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Why not? I've been writing for Field Goals for a while. Going on 5 years now, man. Danny recruited me back 5 years ago in the midst of the Super Bowl run, which people may remember that the Seattle Seahawks did, in fact, win a Super Bowl some time ago. That actually did happen. And so I was just kind of writing fan posts and stuff, and Danny said, hey, you want to write for the site? And I said, sure. It kind of happens like magic like that sometimes. But I've been a Seahawks fan for a long time. Season ticket holder for about 13 years now. And let's see. I just love anything Seahawks. I've been obsessed with them.
Well, what was the what was the first team that you watched and sort of monitored?
Back when I was a kid, my dad was a big Niners fan. And so the first game I remember watching was the Super Bowl where they defeated the Bengals. And it was very first game I ever remember watching, Super Bowl. I thought they were all going to be like that. I thought it was normal to go down the whole field in the last 2 minutes of the game and win a Super Bowl title dramatically coming from behind. I thought all the football games were like that.
Now you know that all the football games are you drive down the field in the Super Bowl and throw an interception.
No, don't even. I knew from the first second of your first syllable of your sentence right there. I knew what you were saying. That's terrible. Yes, so 50-50. Either you're going to go down for the winning touchdown or you're going to go and throw the most heartbreaking pass in Super Bowl history. It's 50-50, one or the other. Let's see. Other than that, I am Seahawks obsessed. They're very much my passion. Pass it on to the boys. They love it too. Talk Seahawks any time of the year. There is no off season. That kind of thing. Let's talk. Let's talk what they've done, man.
All right, let's do it. Michael Bennett being the most relevant name, just
Yeah.
because he's the move that we know for sure will, I mean, barring something really unforeseen, will happen on March 14th, being traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. 5 years of Bennett being here. How do you sort of feel like his arc was going? Do you feel that that they are moving him at the right time, or that it just sort of makes it a little bit more difficult to say goodbye, knowing that because of the contract that they signed him to in December of 2016, they didn't get much of a return, and they were kind of hamstringed by having to make this move.
I see there's two things about this whole move. Like, there's the fact that it was probably the smart move to trade him now, and you don't want to pay him for the almost 15 million or whatever you're on the hook for 2019 and 2020 for sure. I mean, but I sure wanted them to keep him. I wanted him to retire here. I mean, he's one of those guys whose personality is so huge. And he's an original. Those are the guys you love to have on your team and you love to root for. But from a calculating point of view, yeah, this is the right time to trade him. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what your return was. I mean, he needed the cap flexibility. He's 33. As much as I hate the fact that they traded him, you got to respect that they probably did it at the right time.
Right. I mean, they didn't couldn't do much. I was thinking like they were gonna release him if they didn't trade him. So
Right.
in terms of a lot of people feeling underwhelmed with the trade, did you feel, I mean, it's obviously what you want to say is Michael Bennett is a great player. He's one of the better edge rushers in the NFL, or at least, a complete 900 to 1,000 snaps. Not a lot of guys can defend the run and the pass.
Three down guy. Exactly.
And,
There's not a lot of those.
it's a move up from one day 3 pick to a different day 3 pick, and a receiver who may or may not make the team.
I think they got something interesting in Marcus Johnson. So I think the return. I mean, they've always wanted to be better on special teams, and I remember back in the day when they had two outstanding gunners in Lockett and Lane, and I think that made a big difference on punt returns and kick returns when they had those kinds of guys on their special teams. Really bothering the other returner. And I think they've gotten away from that recently. They had one decent gunner, and Nico Thorpe. I love Thorpe. I think in that role, he's a huge asset to the team. But if they can have two of them, I think that's better. So, and maybe Marcus Johnson turns into a better version of Ricardo Lockett, who's a useful guy to have on your roster.
The other move, of course, being that you talked about Michael Bennett as a quote unquote original, but even more original than that. I mean, if you really think about what we're talking about in terms of the Seahawks and the era that many people remember, the window that many people remember, there were elements in 2010 with, of course, Carroll and Schneider, but then with Marshawn Lynch and Earl Thomas, and then in 2011. I think that was the biggest change of all, was perhaps adding Richard Sherman there at the cornerback spot. He brings an attitude and a swagger to the other guys, Cam Chancellor and Earl Thomas. I don't know if they're the same types of players that they would have been without Richard Sherman sort of opening the door to say, this is okay. It's okay for us to sit on this field and say that we're the best in the NFL. Earl Thomas is a super quiet guy, but, just an absolute Terminator when the game is on. Cam Chancellor is a scary dude, but also kind of like a scary dude who lurks in the shadows. But Richard Sherman was the guy that said, let's get in their face and tell them that we're going to beat them, and then let's go out there and beat them. So Richard Sherman was not just, arguably the best cornerback in the NFL for 6 years, 5 years. He was also, just sort of he embodied so much about the Seattle Seahawks defense, and the reports now are that the Seahawks will release them to save $11 million. Do you care about that $11 million, or do you want Richard Sherman to be here?
I want Richard Sherman to be here because I love being hated. Oh, man. One of the greatest things about Richard Sherman was how he would polarize other teams and other teams' fans, and he brought that we are not like every other team to the Seahawks, and all that negative tension. Man, I think they thrived on that. I think the Seahawks themselves loved it, and I loved it. It's really, really fun in the NFL to be hated. From my perspective, other people want love and respect. I think if they hate you, you're doing a lot. You're just a ton of things right when they hate you, and I'll miss that. And the fact is, he's a future Hall of Famer. I think you give those guys as many chances to bounce back as possible. I would prefer that they release him and that they find that they can bring him back at the same cost that somebody else would pay him. This is the thing that I would prefer. The question is his pride going to allow that? Right? You never know. You never know with these guys who are at the very top, the pinnacle of their sport, whether they can really stomach coming back at a lower price to the same team.
Right.
So that's a wild card here. I have no idea what he's thinking. Weird, right? You would think that we would figure it out by now what he's thinking, but no, I have no idea what he's thinking.
I mean, I think, two things there. One being the idea of being hated. I mean, Michael Bennett and Richard Sherman probably are the two guys that other teams hate because, Bennett gets into trouble with those like end of game scrimmages. Richard Sherman obviously is Richard Sherman. So, who do you think even steps up into that role? Even two or three? Can you think of two or three guys that are going to be on the team next year that do take on that role?
People respect Earl too much. On the defense, they're afraid of Cam. They were. Man, people like to hate Russell Wilson, but it's a different sort of hate.
Right.
It's begrudging, and it's more like they think he's a phony and stuff like that. I don't know who the haters
like Bobby Wagner is a sweetheart. KJ Wright is just a shy guy.
How can you hate a guy who has a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles backpack? This is not possible.
Frank Clark has gotten into some stuff with in practices with teammates. Yeah, and I know that he's got his other stuff, but I feel even on the field he's kind of there's just not enough moments. I mean, if we were talking about Frank Clark, he's so good, and at the same time there's just not enough moments where you're really coming out of the game going, Frank Clark just dominated. Like it doesn't feel like he just shows up or he doesn't show up. It doesn't feel like he's a consistently like dominant presence. And if he gets shut down, maybe, by a good left tackle or right tackle, maybe that is part of what makes him like sort of crawl into a shell, or maybe I'm completely wrong. What do you think?
And he's polarizing to our fans, but certainly certainly not to the league at large. I mean, nobody thinks about him that way.
That's the thing. Yeah, nobody really thinks about him.
Right. And he's a Bruce Irvin type where you see him have these huge games and then you don't hear about him for a couple games. And then he has this huge game and then you don't hear about him for a couple games. Yeah. I don't know who they're going to hate it. We got to draft some loudmouth. Maybe that's part of Pete's plan. Maybe Pete is like, we got to get back to some of these guys who have a little bit more edge like that. But then why would they release Sherman? I don't know.
So if
it's the Seahawks, I just do not know.
If the with Richard Sherman, what would be the next move there? Do you feel? I mean, nobody can feel totally confident in Shaquille Griffin being the best corner. Being elevated to like, well, you're our number one hope now at cornerback. Like, they're also just sort of not the team that drafts a cornerback early. They haven't done it before. Shaquille Griffin is the highest drafted cornerback under these guys. And, free agency, it's like, well, who's the best free agent cornerback you can get out there? Isn't it Richard Sherman if you're going to release him?
I suspect that they're happy with Griffin, and that's the reason that they're taking this chance with Sherman, like more than happy with Griffin. And I also suspect that they're going to draft a couple cornerbacks late, and that they're looking ahead to 2019 for those times when the new secondary, maybe even, without Cam probably in 2 years, when that new secondary is ready to take over. I think they want to do it. I think they're ready to move on from Sherman because they feel like their 2019 secondary is going to be a powerhouse. I think this is the way they're looking at that because I could see them keeping Coleman and Maxwell for the next couple of years, and rolling with Coleman, Maxwell, Griffin, and then trying to take the league back by storm again in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think their thinking is on that. But then again, they might just bring back Sherman at lower cost. Or
so
they might not even get rid of him at all. I mean, everyone says they will, but then what if they don't?
Right. What if they don't?
What if they don't? Then we've had a week of circus.
It's hard for us to even, record a podcast and know what, by the end of the podcast, everything we say could be not true,
Dude, I have Twitter open. Right now on the laptop. This is not my first podcast. I know what we're doing here.
The other things that the Seahawks will do or need to do, we know that Cam Chancellor is unlikely to, return. Cliff Averill is unlikely to return, both because of serious injuries. That makes them forced into so those are two other guys that, at the beginning of last season, we were looking at the Seattle Seahawks, which was, Cam Chancellor and Richard Sherman and Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill. And just those four guys out of 11 starters on defense, we are almost certain, or it seems pretty obvious, or it seems most likely that those four right there alone will be gone. And then, we can talk about, whether or not Earl Thomas could be moved, or, whether or not they could be, they'll have to, make a move with, not being able to make a move with Sheldon Richardson. And with that, they've freed up, $31-38 million, depending on some future moves. What do you think that money is for?
I think there's definitely an extension of some sort coming. It seems like, to me, they've chosen Earl Thomas over Richard Sherman. What this move about Richard Sherman is, of course, it's for a couple of years from now, but it's also the fact that if they're going to give money to somebody, it's going to be in the secondary, it's going to be Earl Thomas. That they've chosen to pay him over Sherman. I think that they're looking at an extension for either Frank Clark or Sheldon Richardson, one or the other. But that $31 to $38 million, I'm no cap genius. That $30-ish million, I have read the same numbers, like 35 million or so, disappears pretty quickly. I think they have room for 2 extensions tops.
Yeah, I mean, they also,
Dwayne Brown
out of
too.
that money, there's a good 10 or 12 million that's pre-spoken for, basically. Right. So if it's $35 million, you're down to $23 million on actual money that you can spend on free agents or players that you're retaining.
Yep. Let's not even get into the offensive guys they need to extend, such as maybe Dwayne Brown. I mean, they might do that. Maybe Justin. Even. No, they just did Britt. Sorry.
Right. They just did Justin, and it's not like they're. I don't see exactly. They could give Dwayne Brown a contract to just, I guess, not have to think about it. But I don't think that there's. They've just gotten into this issue with Marshawn Lynch and Michael Bennett and Cam Chancellor. They can't keep giving extensions to dudes who are over 30 or coming close to 30. And Dwayne Brown's going to be 33 if he's not already. You want to say oh, great, they have a left tackle solution. And that Dwayne Brown held out from the Houston Texans last season. But at the same time, they just they can't get out of the contracts of Michael Bennett and Cam Chancellor this year, and it's really hurting them. So if they go out there and they take a guy who is 33 and has taken it's a tough sport to play for how long has Dwayne Brown been playing football? 20 years?
Yeah, listen.
If you're going back to his whole career, there's only so much to go. So, and then you have Andrew Whitworth, who's 35, 36, and he still looks great. So you don't know. But
I feel like our whole podcast, we should say one sentence and then say the opposite immediately and go, or they could. This is what they're going to do, or they won't do that. I feel like recording this week and talking about the Seahawks this week, even more so than usual weeks, is just man.
So
where are we going with this?
There is the object of their 3 biggest name free agents. You mentioned Sheldon Richardson. There's also Jimmy Graham and Paul Richardson. And the one that nobody seems to really think will return or really even cares so much to return is Graham. But for you personally, just all things aside, just what they're going to cost roughly. Maybe Paul Richardson's $7 million a year. Maybe
Sure.
Jimmy Graham is
10,
9 to
9.
$10 million a year, and maybe Sheldon Richardson is 13, 14,
Yeah.
15 million a year. So and maybe that's the value that they deserve. But out of those three, like, how do you rank them?
Right. See, I'm higher on Graham than almost anybody else because you need people on your team that are going to score the frickin' touchdowns. And right now, for all of Graham's perceived faults, like he's fine, he's not great as a blocker, he's a mediocre blocker, he doesn't show up outside of the red zone, he doesn't have the right attitude. I'm not sure I buy really any of those three things to the extent that the popular narrative does. You need a guy, regardless of all that, you need somebody who can catch the ball in the end zone. And he is a person who can do that. He is a touchdown maker. You need a touchdown maker. If you don't have him on the team, who's your touchdown maker? Right? I mean, it's Doug Baldwin. Okay. I like Doug.
Right. I remember how excited everybody was at the time that they added Jimmy Graham because they were saying Marshawn Lynch and Jimmy Graham are two of the top 3 touchdown scorers in the NFL.
Right.
And then it never really worked out that way.
Yeah, they were actually guys who, over the last 5 years, they had like in the top 5 most, both of them. That's right. We were supposed to only score touchdowns. We were going to call the touchdown play every play. Hand it to Marshawn, go it to Jimmy.
That's the one thing about that's sort of difficult sometimes about trying to analyze moves like acquisitions, trades, things like that, because people do not really want to believe that sometimes things don't work out. Like when it comes down to oh, well, this is such a good move. You're really stupid if you say that this is maybe not going to work out, because it's like Michael Bennett going to the Eagles being an example of it, where they say Michael Bennett is a great pass rusher. They already have 5 great defensive linemen. That's going to be a great unit. But in the same token, it's like the Seahawks added, Percy Harvin. And even when he was healthy the following year, it never made sense for them. The way that they used him, it never made sense.
That's
Jimmy
right.
Graham, that first year, and a lot of things since then have not worked out in the way that anyone would have imagined. When they added him after 2 straight Super Bowls, they got worse. When they added, Sheldon Richardson, the defense should, for all intents and purposes, be better. Their one biggest weakness on defense was defensive tackle. Yeah. He was one of the top 5 or 10 in the entire NFL, and it was underwhelming. So in all of these acquisitions, whenever you're saying the rich get richer, it's funny to me, like, you can't take the opposition. You can't take that point of saying, oh, I don't know, maybe it's not going to work, because people will shoot you down so immediately. And the reality of the situation is sometimes, if not often, it doesn't work.
I feel like if you want to take a baseball analogy on some of those things, each of those moves feels like it was a fly ball to the warning track that looks like it's going to be a home run when it's hit. And then the guy settles under it, 3 feet in front of the wall, and catches it, and you don't get the result, but you still put a great swing on the ball. I feel like I sort of want Schneider to make that kind of move again. I don't mind him going out to spend serious assets, whether it's coin or picks, to go get that kind of guy again. I think they should still do that. I think they should still make the move for the Sheldon Richardson disruptor, for the Percy Harvin type who changes the way that the defense reacts, for the Jimmy Graham who's a touchdown machine. I think he should still swing for the fences.
It's funny though, because it's like it can go both ways. Like the Philadelphia Eagles, it was like what, 2 or 3 years ago when they added everybody, and there was a big name, and they sucked. And then this time around, like, what made them good? Like, they added Chris Long for like $2 million a year. The best time the Seattle Seahawks ever signed Michael Bennett was the first time, when it was a 1-year deal for $4 or $5 million or whatever.
The Eagles had a ton of players. They had nobody they were paying more than $10 million. They were paying a ton of guys $5 to $10 million, and getting a ton of production from them in the $10 to $15 million range. They just really they made some moves that at the time may have seemed highly underwhelming, but turned out to be big time moves.
I mean, you can also, you can look at the Denver Broncos after they lost to the Seahawks. They added guys like Aqib Talib. It's like, oh, that's a bigger name, and it did work. It helped them win a Super Bowl and build this great defense. You still have to make those other moves. So if the Seahawks, they have this extra money, I still think their philosophy, which we don't know how much their philosophy they've decided to change, because they did, fire a bunch of coaches and get rid of some of their players that were considered to be cornerstone important players. So we don't know exactly how much their philosophies are shifting a little bit. I don't know how much Pete Carroll wants to shift philosophies as he approaches 70. And we can talk about just with regards to that, like, what are your thoughts on Pete Carroll at this stage of his life, at this stage of his career, with what we've seen from the Seahawks in 2018?
Well, how old is Pete Carroll really? I mean, sure, he's upper 60s, but I mean, who knows with that guy how long he's going to coach? I feel like he could go 5 more years without breaking a sweat. And so I'm not sure that everybody who's talking about, well, this is a Pete Carroll's last attempt to build back up the Seahawks, and if it doesn't go right in a year or two, he's done. I don't know. I think maybe we got 4 or 5 more years of Pete Carroll, of juice in him, until he's ready to be done. And I think that's what a lot of this offseason was about, was him setting himself up for a second run, similar to what they started in 2010, with like a 5-year type of plan where they have some nice pieces already, which they didn't have in 2010. And they just start to build it back up again with the guys that he really wants, with guys that are young and hungry, using the same sort of ideas in 2010 and 2011, just drafting, developing. And I think that all the clearing out of the coaching staff is just him setting himself up for 5 more years. So... Mm-hmm. No, that's all. Go ahead.
No, it's interesting because it's like, yeah, I mean, Pete Carroll is 66, and I looked it up, but like Pete Carroll is 66, and I'm like, Dick Vermeil went to the Chiefs in 2001 when he was 65, so it's like
Marv Levy coached into his 70s.
Yeah, Marv Levy, was able to come back, and I think that Pete Carroll certainly does not. I mean, maybe it's because I'm getting older, but 66 doesn't sound old to me.
Dude, I'm 43. I'm turning 44 later this year. This is my age 44 season. That's correct.
And you don't want to believe that, anyone's telling, it's 66. It's like, hey, he's fine.
Yeah.
My dad is almost 80. It's like, he seems fine. He could coach, or he could do whatever job he was doing before, I think Pete Carroll is certainly could go another 3 or even another 7. There is some leeway there. But there also is the question of, like, does he want to do all of that time with the Seahawks?
Well, once Sherman signs with the Rams, then
there you go.
Just go back to LA. And
oh man, what's the age difference there? 40 years between him and Sean McVay.
Well, Pete could be like team president. This is perfect. You just keep McVay on. That's no problem. I think we got it all worked out.
So the other thing would be, sort of the free agents that are out there that the Seahawks could look at for themselves. And I don't have any list in front of me necessarily as terms of who's going to be out there. There's certainly names thrown around. People talk about offensive linemen. One thing with regards to guards, is
regards to guards.
That
did you just do that?
In regards to guards, I mean, I love those natural little happenings. But with regards to guards, like I wonder what your opinion is, because like we saw the Seahawks sign Luke Jokel last year for 1 year and $8 million, which is a bargain for a lot of reasons. Even though $8 million made Jokel, above average paid guard. And
I didn't mind that. I didn't mind that, by the way. I just want to say that.
Yeah, it's worth I think it was worth it, and there's no talk about him coming back. I have no idea what he's expected to get, but like there is now talk out there for someone like Andrew Norwell from the Carolina Panthers, who first time was a All-Pro, and I don't know, I don't know exactly. Like his first 3 years, very nondescript. And then last year, he's playing opposite of Try Turner, who was also a Pro Bowler right there. Maybe Try Turner is a better guard. I don't know, but it worked out for him. And now let's talk like $12, $13 million per year for a guard. And in my mind, that is also not how you build a team by doing that. So what are your thoughts on the Seahawks going out there and replacing those guard positions if that's what they need to do?
Do they need to? Yeah, probably they need one guy at least. They can get somebody. See, here's the deal with the offensive line. It seems like it's the same thing every offseason where we just pick up a couple free agents, let the young guys develop, and we should be fine. Except then the guys come in as free agents and they don't really do anything, and the developing is too slow. And then we're stuck back exactly where we were the year before. Maybe it's different with Solari. Hopefully it's different with Solari. I think you got to pay one guy. I think you can't just go through the draft to replenish. I think you gotta give Fant to try, and I think out of the free agents, if you can avoid paying $8 million again this year, then that would be fine. But then you get guys like Odeabushi, who just really didn't do anything here. If you're only going to pay $1 or $2 million, there's such a dearth of offensive linemen. There's not enough good offensive linemen. I mean, this is not groundbreaking news. Everybody knows this.
Right. What's crazy is I'm just looking this up right now. Who do you think and this is according to overthecap.com, who do you think was the lowest paid offensive line in the NFL last year? So all the money allocated to offensive linemen.
Ooh, the lowest?
Of all the teams.
The Patriots, maybe?
The Tennessee Titans.
Oh.
Who may have the best offensive line in the NFL, allocated $17 million.
And they just let Murray go, by the way. They love Henry. And I think that's a smart move by them, actually.
So the Titans, they can't stay there because the Taylor Lewan is going to get paid and Jack Conklin. But that's where that drafting comes from. But another thing that people need to realize, and it's a hard thing sometimes to get across, is the Tennessee Titans drafted those guys early, and the Seahawks haven't been drafting early. And offensive linemen outside of the top 10 usually just do not have a lot to offer these days.
It's not. I mean, taking guys like Carpenter and Ifedi at the bottom of the first round, that's fine. But you're getting second-tier guys.
Right.
Second-tier guys are going to make it or they're going to not. I mean, that sounds like the most obvious statement ever. But, I mean, you're going to get a much higher bust rate on your second tier of offensive linemen, and that's where they've been picking from.
Yeah. It's to me, too, the number one thing still to this point is, and I think you alluded to this earlier, is edge rushers, just like well, you just alluded to like getting someone else to replace Michael Bennett or to keep moving in that direction. And like, for me, it's just, if they just got rid of one too, and they know Cliff Averill is probably not coming back, and we don't know about Sheldon Richardson. So anything has to be like, get pass rushers, get defensive linemen, because whether it's through the draft or through free agency or whatever, like, I don't believe in signing someone like Ezekiel Ansah or Muhammad Wilkerson necessarily. I don't believe in spending more than $14 million or $15 million on any player per year on any player that's not a quarterback. I don't think those contracts work out. I don't think that there's any evidence that it's a good idea. So that's not my thing. But I definitely think in the same way that they added Averill and Bennett, they sort of need to do that again. What do you say? What's the number one priority for you?
No, I don't think defensive end is a huge priority for me, actually. I think they should draft one for sure, and they should draft one high because they're going to need – because those guys tend to get paid and move on. I think they want to extend Frank Clark, and I think they love Deion Jordan. And so I think they've got their two defensive ends set up for starting DNs. I think they're looking at 2018, 2019. What year are we again? They're looking at 18 and 19 as set up already with Clark and Jordan, in my opinion. But they're still going to draft a guy because they'd rather have 3 or 4 defensive ends who are studs than just 2. So yeah, you always want to get another defensive end, but I don't think the free agent market is a way to do that.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk last question here, last topic.
Oh, sure. Go for
it. Another position that is, always not always, but under a microscope right now is running back.
I'm ready. I can see that one coming a mile away.
The Seahawks had the worst running back situation in the NFL last season, but we also, as much as people talk about how bad the run game was, Chris Carson was not bad. Chris Carson for 4 games was good and productive and made it work.
Chris Carson is a starter. Chris Carson is a RB1 on this team.
And but the Seahawks still need to do stuff because I think Thomas Rawls was a RB1 in 2015 before he broke his ankle. So there's always going to be caution, and there always has to be reinforcements. And the Seahawks, even if they bring back Thomas Rawls and Mike Davis and have Chris Carson and CJ Prosise and JD McKissick, even if they bring back all 5 of those guys, they still probably need to add 2 or 3 or 4 more. And where would you add those guys, whether it's on day 3 of the draft, day 1 of the draft, or free agency spending $4 million, $5 million on someone?
No. I'm not spending any free agent money on running backs, not just because of the Eddie Lacy miss experiment, but no, you're getting guys whose best days are behind them when you sign free agents for the most part, unless you luck out on somebody that you really, really liked in previous drafts and then somebody released for whatever reason. But no, I want no part of Jonathan Stewart. Please no. DeMarco Murray just got released. So no, we're not doing anything with DeMarco Murray. Please no. Isaiah Crowell, maybe. I could go for that guy. He's only 25. And Brown's moving on from him. Or he's an upcoming free agent at least. But yeah, all these other guys whose best years are behind him, Alfred Morris, Jamal Charles. I don't want to see any of that. I could go for Jeremy Hill. I'm looking at a list actually of running back free agents right now.
Yeah, and the interesting thing there with regards to Brian Schottenheimer is when he was with the Jets, it would be like Thomas Jones or LaDainian Tomlinson. It would be guys, oftentimes he would have at least one running back who was productive early in his career or throughout his career and was 30, 31 years old, and then he went to the Rams and they sort of, he got something out of Steven Jackson when Steven Jackson was 29, 30. So to me, that meeting with Jonathan Stewart, as much as I agree with you, does make sense with what changes they've already made. So it's like, they could bring in someone like Jonathan Stewart because they need someone in their minds. Brian Schottenheimer might need someone who's like, he doesn't have to teach a lot of things to, I guess.
No, and he's a big back. Bill, give me a choice between Jonathan Stewart and Frank Gore, though. And I know Gore's 35. I'm aware that Frank Gore is almost my age and is sick. He's 66. His Pete Carroll years in running back years. He's so old, 35.
Oh, yeah. So that's not even back. He's more like Marv Levy.
But I'll take Frank Gore. I will take him on the Seahawks. That dude is indestructible.
Yeah.
And he does all the little things right. 1-year contract for Frank Gore. I support that. Even though he's half of 70.
That's like the long con of like, we're going to get Frank Gore one of these days. After, just destroying us for years and years and years. We'll get you one day. We'll get him when he's 35.
Seahawks legend, Frank Gore.
Absolutely. John Fraley, much appreciate you coming onto the show. Where do people find you on Twitter and how do they listen to your other show?
Yeah, dude, it was a blast. Thank you so much for having me. Even though all we said was, well, they could do this or not do that, or they could do that or not do this, which seems like, kind of where we're stuck here today. I'm on Twitter a lot. People can find me on Twitter at John David Fraley, all one big word, Fraley, at John David Fraley. And then Seahawks Scout and Mike and I, host the Tasteful Profanity podcast, and that comes out weekly. And give that a listen. You can find that at Beastpode. It's a very bad pun, but we do love very bad puns. We're all about that. So at Beastpode, you can find us there.
At Beastpode.
At Beastpode. Hey, thanks a lot, man. Oh, and
yeah, thanks.
I'm working on like so many articles behind the scenes for Field Goals. So keep coming back to Field Goals. You're going to see some stuff by me, you guys. Anybody listening? I got oodles of ideas. I just haven't put them down on paper yet.
And just so you guys know, John does write his articles on paper and then send them to me in the mail, and then I type them up.
I might fax
Yeah.
the next one. Yeah, that's a good plan.
John Fraley, thank you so much for coming on to Seahawks Chats. For those of you out there, you can also follow us on Twitter at Field Goals. I'm at Kenneth Arthur S. And you can go to fieldgoals.com. Please do subscribe to the show on iTunes at Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. I've made it very confusing. So, subscribe to Seaside Chats. If you like the show and you want it to keep going and want to help with the production costs here, you can go to patreon.com/fieldgoals. That's it for this week on Seahawks Chats with Kenneth Arthur and John Fraley this week. And, by the time we come next time, could be a whole new team we're talking about.